Later this morning, a very young Seamus Brennan from the archives.
You know, Seamus, when you look back over your career in politics...
I'm not finished yet, Mike.
You're not finished? You've a long way to go, I know.
That's Seamus Brennan at 36. We turn next to the early career of a politician who died during the past week, Seamus Brennan, TD for Dublin South since 1981. 4 times a minister for education, for transport, for family and social welfare, and most recently for arts, sport and tourism. All his ministries were in coalition governments. He helped negotiate many of them, including the first Fianna Fáil coalition with the Progressive Democrats in 1989. His first job in politics was as a very young General Secretary of Fianna Fáil in the 1970s.
I hope I'm leaving a much more modern, streamlined, better organised, more almost enthusiastic party than the party I picked up.
This is from an interview with Rodney Rice in 1980, on the occasion when Seamus Brennan, unhappy with how he was being treated by the then newly elected leader of Fianna Fáil, Charles Haughey, resigned as General Secretary and announced his intention to contest the next general election.
When I said in my statement that I hope to make a contribution, I can now make it as a senator, but I've got to get out on those streets and ask the Irish people to give me a mandate to make a kind of a deeper contribution. And without wanting to be seen to be uncaring about today's problems, I want to concentrate on that if I can in the months and in the years ahead. I have no doubt the government will successfully grapple with and overcome the difficulties which face them.
Do you not think that contribution could perhaps have been made better by staying on as General Secretary of the party, a position of some influence and some power, instead of going onto the backbenches, which is the first step if you win an election, and then perhaps, if there's a Fianna Fáil victory and Mr. Haughey is still a Taoiseach, staying in the backbenches, because let's be honest about it, a lot of people would say that because of the rows and disagreements, no matter what their depth was, your association with Mr. Lynch in the past is going to mean that you would not be a prime candidate for a ministerial seat.
I'm only interested in power for what I can do. I have no interest whatsoever in it for its own sake. I think it's a terrible hassle for one's family and oneself. I believe that if you're a public representative, be a senator or a TD, and preferably a TD, that you're in direct touch with the people on the ground every day, and you can therefore contribute at party meetings, at party functions, and you can contribute to the formulation of policy. Now, of course I could have done this as General Secretary, and of course I could have continued on to be influential in that area. But I think at some stage in one's political life you have to make the jump between being primarily a party official, a party administrator, and the other side almost, and that is a party formulator of policy. And at times it can be a gulf. And I think to be legitimate in contributing to party policy, you really should have the support of the people behind you. And I would like to sort of legitimise my right to contribute to Irish policy. In regard to ministries and all that sort of thing, that's so far away, Rodney, that I haven't given that any thought at all.
Seamus Brennan never lost an election. He fought 9 times in Dublin South. He won the first seat in 1981, he won the third, the fourth, always comfortably, then the second, the first, the second, the second, the first, and the first on the last 2 occasions, and in 2007 he won 13,373 first preference votes.
It's now 23 minutes past 9. My guest this morning is Fianna Fáil TD for Dublin South, Seamus Brennan.
Next from the Mike Murphy Show archives, young backbencher in Charles Haughey's Fianna Fáil, Seamus Brennan, then aged 36.
Seamus, good morning to you.
Hey Mike, morning to you.
You know, Seamus, when you look back over your career in politics...
I'm not finished yet, Mike.
You're not finished? You've a long way to go, I know. But when you look back over it, Seamus, there you are. You were qualified, ready to move into the business world, but the call of politics lured you into, would you say trap, or would you say into its honeyed
being?
I thought it was the latter, Mike, the honeyed bean part. As time goes on, I'm not so sure it's not the former. But we'll find out. Time will tell.
Are you sorry, Seamus, that you went into politics at all?
Well, I often think that if I was doing it all over again, I may not do it. That's the way I feel about it. And if some of my family were to come to me and say, look, I would like to be a TD, and I'd like to go into politics full-time and spend my life at it, I'd tell them to go away. They were crazy.
Would you now?
I would, absolutely.
On what basis?
On the basis that it's an artificial existence. It's a crazy way to spend your life. The hours are impossible. There's no guarantee whatsoever. When you put in maybe 3 or 4 years of excellent work, what you think is excellent work, all of a sudden some genius changes the boundaries or something and you're out of a job. It's very insecure in that way. It's also frustrating in the sense that there's things you want to get done and then you find that the guy sitting beside you says you can't do it. And you feel like telling him to get lost, but then you realise, well, God, he's one of my constituents, or he's one of my colleagues in the party, and there are all sorts of holes in it which are make it very difficult. So I'm not in any way disillusioned with it. I find it a very exciting business and I love it.
Yes,
but I wouldn't advise anyone that I love to go into it.
But for a young person now going into politics, one does, as you did, start out as a shining idealist. And then, but does one become bruised by the vicissitudes of life in politics?
I think you do, but I'm not sure that doesn't happen in every walk of life, no matter what you do. I have a feeling that whatever your career and whatever your path in life, that you learn something every day, you become disillusioned at times, and then you pick yourself up and get back in the race, as they say. And I think that's very much, except that it happens more often in politics.
Yes.
You know, you feel it happening every second day. You say to yourself, my God, this is crazy, what the hell am I doing? And then you say, well, look, I'm going on with this because I want to do these things.
What is the reason you go on? What do you want to do? Do you still have the same objectives you had when you said politics is for me, I'm going to change the world?
I'm not going to change the world, no, but I know it's a short life, and I like to do something useful, and what I regard as important with it. And I can't think of anything more important than working with people and doing something for your country. Now, I know the cynics who are listening will say, well, we've heard of that nonsense before.
You see, that is the reaction of a lot of people, and one does find it hard not to adopt that attitude.
It does, and that's one of the big dangers today, is there's tremendous cynicism out there about politicians and about anybody in any kind of authority. A lot of it is justified, I have to say, but a lot of it isn't justified. You know, some of the... You know, for example, if I go into the Dáil tomorrow and kick up a stink at 2:30 and call people names and oppose this, that and the other and get thrown out of my ear, I'll most likely make the front page of the paper the next day, almost certainly. But if I do as I did for the last 3 weeks, a detailed committee stage of the finance bill, putting in something like 60 hours, I got about 4 lines. I'm not blaming, I'm not falling back on the old problem, I'm just saying that what the guy in the 64 bus sees is the headline of the TD being thrown out of the Dáil and saying something silly.
And yet,
but he doesn't see the small print.
There is the problem there that whereas you are putting in the work behind the scenes, you are not seen to be actually doing anything by your own constituents.
Isn't that the dilemma and the difficulty of it? That it's not just good enough to do the job. That you then have to go and make sure that you're seen to do the job, and that leads people into doing silly old things that they wouldn't dream of doing otherwise, and making silly statements that they wouldn't dream of making in the normal course. But they've suddenly got to grab the attention of people like you. Otherwise, because everyone is saying to them, you know, God, are you doing anything these days? We never hear about you. You mustn't be working at all.
Yeah.
And they say, oh God, I am. I'm going to committees and I'm at legislation and I'm involved in all these things in the Dáil. And they say, well, God, no, we never hear about you. You mustn't be doing a stroke in there.
Yes.
And then that leads one to say, well, God, I better get up here and kick up a bit of a racket.
It's terrible, isn't it?
It is a pity, but how do you get around that?
Yes.
And that has led to a lot of cynicism, I think. And then the other thing that's led to a lot of cynicism, I think, is the expectations of what we can do. I had far higher hopes of what I thought politics was more powerful.
You thought what?
I thought politics was more powerful. I thought you could do a lot more. But you actually find that when you get near those levers that you can do less than you think you could do.
Yes. How do you see yourself in your own career at the moment, Seamus? You were going along there beautifully as General Secretary. You then went on very well. You went in and stood and did so well, and became elected and so on. And there was all along the personality clashes that you had. With the present leader, with CJ, you had, it would appear, personality clashes with him during your General Secretariatship, and then subsequently, of course, there were tensions as well. Wasn't there an occasion where Mr. Haughey had a go at you for getting too many column inches in the newspapers at one stage?
I read that, but that didn't happen. I don't ever remember him ringing me up and saying, listen, get out of the newspapers. I regret, and I think everybody does, that there has to be any personality tensions. Unfortunately, it seems to be, and I didn't invent the system, but it seems to be an inevitable part of politics, that there are tensions and differences, and that people don't see things the same way. That's not a sign of weakness in the system, I think. I think it can be a sign of strength, because if people see things differently, then I think they have a duty to say that, and a duty to make it known to each other. And not to be arm in arm, all palsy-walsy, pretending to everybody that everything is rosy, and that 100% agreement is the ideal, when in fact agreement might only be 60%. I think that's unreal, and it's dishonest, and it's also unnecessary.
Yes. Nonetheless, it must breed an element of insecurity within a party.
If a party represents half the people, you're going to have, you just say go on the 64 bus and talk to 6 people, and you'll get 6 different opinions as to how the country should be run, and as to how Fianna Fáil should be run, and as to any issue you care to pick. You therefore go into a political party that represents half the Irish people, and you're going to get enormous differences of opinion. There are enormous differences of opinion in every party in this country. I don't care what they tell me, and how united they all stand up with the Ardèche and Clapham. They've all got different opinions, they have different views about how things should happen. They probably agree on the fundamentals and the broad strategy. But you ask any one of them privately, and they all feel that, well, I prefer to do it this way and I prefer to do it that way.
Yes.
We're all individuals at the end of the day.
Yes.
And the day that people are not individuals, and not honest and open about their own beliefs and views,
yes,
I think the whole system will fall apart, and I wouldn't want to be part of it.
Younger listeners might need to be told that Fianna Fáil was at this stage a deeply divided party, and was incidentally in opposition. Gareth Fitzgerald was Taoiseach at the time. There had been a number of heaves against Charles Haughey's leadership. Brennan was among the conspirators, as they were thought of by Haughey on each occasion. And the Progressive Democrats, led by Des O'Malley, would be formed within a year of this interview.
I'd love to know how you and a few other people who would be, I suppose, associated with the dissident element to an extent.
That's a terrible word. I hate that word.
Within the Fianna Fáil party, reacted to the recent popularity, the upsurge in popularity of Mr. Haughey.
We were pleased to see the party doing well. And let me say about Mr. Haughey, because you're obviously probing that, we've had all this out.
Who?
The party, we've had it out on the floor. There's a lot of blood left on the floor of Leinster House. We've had our battles. And as far as I'm concerned, those battles are over. We've settled the matter. We've had our votes. I can't be a Democrat and go to the people of Dublin South and say, look, elect me, and I'll accept your wishes. I can't then turn around in Leinster House of the Parliamentary Party and say, let's have a democratic election, and I won't accept it. I can't do that, and I wouldn't do that. We've had our battles, we've had our upsurges, and that thing is settled and is behind us, I hope.
It is it?
I hope so, yeah.
And so, would you think then, for the future now, with the popularity that Mr. Haughey has garnered, that he will be leading Fianna Fáil for the foreseeable future?
I think we'll have a general election in the next 2 or 3 years. And he'll certainly be leading the party.
Yes, yeah. One of the drawbacks, of course, as you say, about going into politics is, unlike a business like, for example, the business I'm in, where, you're known, yes, you're known, but people are not coming to you asking you to get the light fixed on the road all the time. So for a politician, there are double pressures. First of all, he is known to the public, and secondly, the public are wanting something from him all the time. That's a demand, I think, that must affect one's family as well as themselves.
Yes, it does, and I think increasingly all of us in politics, we're really going to have to have a little bit more courage with the public. And it does take courage. If people elect you, and then the next week they turn around and call you to a meeting and there's 500 of them at it, and they say, look, we don't want this road going through here. I mean, if the road has to go through there, if it just has to, because that's the only way it can go, we're really going to have the guts to tell them. Now, they're really going to crucify you at the meeting when you tell them that, and they're not going to like you for it. And it does take a lot of guts, and increasingly we're all trying to make sure we've got those guts to tell them. And on a bigger scale, the same with the country. If people want more services, we're going to have to tell them it's more taxation. And we're really genuinely going to have to be much straighter with the people about this, and we're going to have to risk personal unpopularity. And that I can tell you, and I'm not minimising it, that is the most difficult thing for people in politics.
But I'm sure there must be times, though, when you find after elections that you must be surprised at the number of first preference votes you got from the people who come up and shake your hands and say, I gave you my first preference vote. They couldn't possibly tally with the number you actually did receive.
Yes, and in fact, if you really added them up, I think you would find that the poll was 110%.
And all for you.
Absolutely, absolutely. You wonder where the others got their votes after a while, you know.
That's right.
But then it works the other way too. You when things are going wrong, you meet a lot of people who are saying, look, that's the end of you after what you said about that. You may only have mentioned it, and it may have been quite a marginal thing. You then feel that no one's ever going to vote for you again.
Yeah.
But I've had a kind of a blooding in electoral politics, Mike, because in the space rather of 2 years, I've had to be elected 3 times. So I was really thrown off the deep end in electoral terms. And the biggest problem I had was trying to decide whether I could make the jump from administrative politics. I was really an organizer and an administrator. And I think probably that's my first love, really, in political terms, is organising and making sure things happen. Not that we talk about them all day, but that they actually happen. And I was wondering whether I could make the jump from being an official, as it were, into the world of politics itself. And I was rather petrified about that prospect, but it worked out.
And what was the most difficult facet of that change?
The accountability, the feeling that you when you go to your local shop, or you walk around the street, or you go to a meeting in the area, that all of these people, you're accountable to them, and all of these people expect you to be doing things for them, not for them, but generally to be representing them. That feeling that instead of slipping into mass and and kneeling at the back and so on, that there are now people looking at you.
And you've got to put a pound in the collection box.
Saying that's our TD, and
that's
God, it's nearly late for mass again.
And look at him sneaking out before the blessing.
Yes. I think that's the biggest change, the consciousness, and saying to Anne, God, would you not clean up that child before you bring her into mass?
That's right. Would you ever send back a meal in a restaurant, though? Would you do?
No, actually, that's the difficulty, and Anne, my wife, was always giving out to me about that, because if she doesn't like it, she just calls them and tells them.
Yeah, and you're going,
I feel like appointing a subcommittee to look at it for a month.
I didn't know, Seamus, until this morning that you had applied to RTE as an announcer.
God, I was wondering when that would come out.
You rotter. Why do you want to get into RTE as an announcer?
I have no idea. I thought there'd be soft jobs in here, but I'm not so sure after all. Let's see the work that you guys have to do. When I was in secondary school, I saw an ad in the paper that said RTE announcers wanted, and I said, that's the job for me. I can handle that. I hear those guys on the radio every day, and it's chicken feed.
Gift of it.
Anyone can do it.
Yeah. So
I wrote off to Dublin to the GPO at the time, and I got back this stereotyped A Cara.
Yes.
You're welcome to come and be interviewed, or it was an audition actually. So I went to Dublin. I don't think I ever told my parents this, so I don't know if they're listening or not. I went to Dublin and I sat in the queue. There was 4 people for interview or audition. And then, before I knew it, this man came out and said, "You were one of the applicants." I said, "Yes." He said, "Here's something I want you to read. Go into that little room, when the red light comes on, I want you to read that." So I said, "That's no trouble." I said, at this time I was in UCG, and I was up to my neck in the Literary and Debating Society, and I was leading student revolts, and I was leading marches on the Minister for Education, who was Brian Lenihan at the time. And
has he ever forgiven you?
I don't know. And that was the background against which I was doing this, or just coming into UCG at the time. And so I waited till the light came on, and then I looked at the paper, and a cold sweat broke out of me. I couldn't read a word of it. It was all about classical music, Tchaikovsky, Beethoven, Susan, is that the man you're talking about? Susan. So I got the words in between the names of the composers.
Yeah.
That's about all I got.
Yeah.
I said to him afterwards, how did I do? He says, the authority will be in touch with you. So I got a stereotype letter about 6 weeks later saying that I really had great potential, but not now.
Gosh, it's a pity Today Tonight wasn't in existence. The Star reporter said he wouldn't have had to mention Mozart at all.
I know. But had they given me the results of the last election to read out, I would have been able to read them out almost without glancing, because I was, even at that time, involved in politics.
That's an exciting night, isn't it? Though the general election, if you're not looking for votes, and if you're not,
absolutely,
but that whole thing of the studio atmosphere and so on is wonderful, isn't it?
It is indeed, and I'll never forget the in 1977 in particular, doing a total of 16 hours television in a row, and being asked why the party was doing well here, why it was doing badly there,
and you had it all at your fingertips because you had organised it and orchestrated.
I did, but it's funny the things you remember about that. I remember sitting beside, it was Basil Chubb, who seemed to have all the answers, and every so often I would try and steal one of Basil's analysis to see if I could do something with it. But while I was doing that, he was stealing my sausage rolls, because the studio were bringing in these sausage rolls and they were leaving them under the counter.
Yes.
And Basil kept stealing mine. So in retaliation, I was taking his analysis, except on one occasion he had made a miscalculation, and I was asked straight out by Brian Farrell at the time, what percentage swing was that in Carroll Kilkenny? So I looked over at Basil and he had it worked out. So I said, it's a clear percentage of 8%. So Basil took it back and said, that's 84.
And Farrell said, come to attention there, the pair of you, stop talking in class.
So I made a mess of it, but that was very enjoyable and very exciting.
Yes.
And that's, I must confess, that was the excitement of politics to me, was the putting together between 73 and 77 of the party, the organisation of it, and then seeing it come into fruition with electoral support. But all that time, really, it's only since I got elected to the Dáil in 1981 that I've really gone into politics and really come to grips with that, because before that, my 7 or 8 years before that as party secretary were totally and utterly into the organisation world.
Yes. Yeah.
And I should tell you that when I was 24 years of age, I got this phone call out of the blue, and I nearly dropped the phone. They said, this is Jack Lynch here, and I'd like you to come to Dublin. The party secretary, who's been here for 30 years, is leaving and would like you to do the job.
And you were doing what at the time?
I was working as an accountant in Galway, and I had just left University College Galway, and I was just married, and I had no intention of leaving the west of Ireland.
And you had joined. You were in the Fianna Fáil party.
Oh yes, I was.
Yes.
I was through the 1960s. I went to university in the late 60s, and that was the time of the student revolts. We thought we were revolutionaries, of course, but really we were no more radical than they are today. We couldn't see why we couldn't get extra grants and new universities and swimming pools and all-weather playing pitches, and I'll never forget demanding all these things from the Minister of Education at the time, who told me he didn't have any money. And I couldn't understand this, and we had a massive student revolution.
Yes.
So I understand students today.
Yes.
I now have to tell them we haven't got the money.
That's right. When Jack Lynch phoned you then, as you say, it was out of the blue, and will you come to Dublin?
I had been on the national executive, but I didn't dream that the party secretary at that time was a man called Senator Tommy Mullins, who had been there for 30 years. He was a great man, but he was really the strength of the party. He was your traditional old party secretary type, where he cracked the whip and he ran a tight ship, and we all looked up to him. And then suddenly I found that I was being asked to do this job. I'll never forget, actually, like when he was leaving after 30 years, and I arrived at the door. It was a Friday, I'll never forget it, and he was leaving at about 5 o'clock, and there was a bit of a farewell party for him. And I arrived at 12 o'clock, and he first of all said he would see me after a while. I had to sit in the waiting room. But when he eventually did see me, and I loved the way he did that, actually, when he did see me, he said, look, I have one piece of advice for you now. He said, you could be a bit of a whiz kid. He said, a young fella like you could be sending out letters and making phone calls, and he said, television and things. He said, my advice to you now, he said, and I've learned this, he said, after 30 years in this business, he said, is when times are difficult in the party, he said, don't be sending too many letters, he said, send word. Send word.
Word. What would word be? Would that be a telephone call or just?
I learned years afterwards what that meant in politics. It meant you didn't send out loads of circulars instructing people what to do. You told somebody who went down and told somebody else, and the message came then down from Dublin that headquarters had sent down the word.
The word.
The word. I always remember
Handed
that.
it down.
Yeah. I didn't know what he meant at the time, but
Yeah.
afterwards I often regretted writing the letter, that particular letter.
Yes.
Oh God, I wish I could take that back.
And send the word instead.
Shouldn't have done that. Should have
Yes,
sent the word.
yeah.
And the word was much more powerful because it had a certain mystique about it.
That's right.
It came from headquarters. It came from the National Executive.
Yes.
And particularly
It's a phrase we use a lot here. The word is.
Yeah.
The late Seamus Brennan from a recording of a live interview with Mike Murphy in 1984. Seamus Brennan was then 36. But first we would like to thank all those listeners who expressed appreciation for last week's interview with the late Seamus Brennan TD, taken from a recording of a live interview by Mike Murphy in 1984 when Seamus was a very recently elected TD. He was then 36. He was to represent Dublin South in Dáil Éireann for 27 years in all. He served in governments led by Charles Haughey, Albert Reynolds and Bertie Ahern, was a senator for 4 years before being elected to the Dáil, and had been appointed as the party's youngest ever General Secretary in 1973, aged then just 25. He founded Ógra Fianna Fáil and was credited with introducing American-style razzmatazz to Irish elections in the 1977 election.
The razzmatazz of 77, I've always said, and I believe, that when you have a message, particularly as a political party, we were trying to say to the young people in 1977 that we can offer you some hope.
Although only a TD for 3 years when this Mike Murphy interview was recorded, he had gone through 3 elections, the summer of 1981 and the February and November 1982 elections. When I was editing that interview for inclusion in last week's programme just 2 days after Seamus Brennan's funeral, I left out one short sequence of the interview because it included a request for music, and I thought it might be unfair or difficult for his family to hear it so soon after his untimely death at the very early age of 60. Anyway, I have since checked with the family and they fully approve of this sequence being heard on this morning's programme. Mike Murphy is talking here to Seamus Brennan about the 1960s, John F. Kennedy, the Beatles, all of that, and the impact it all made on him as a young schoolboy in Galway.
Seamus Brennan, Fianna Fáil TD for Dublin South, is my guest this morning. Seamus, I see that you have the Beatles down, and as you were talking about the 60s there, is it a moment of nostalgia for you that you'd like to include them?
Yes, it is. I went to university in the late 60s, and that was the time of the Beatles. It was the time of John Kennedy. And I should say, in this regard, that John Kennedy came to Galway when I was 16 years of age, and he came down the main street. And I just remember this man who had this most marvellous suntan. I had never seen a suntan like that when I was 16. It was a marvellous suntan. And I remember him shaking loads of hands, one of which I happened to grab. And then I remember afterwards in November when he was assassinated, that I think I was the person in my class who felt it the deepest and the hardest. And I just remember thinking about that time that man stood for something that I would like to stand for if I ever had an opportunity. And I remember that, and I really think that was one of the greatest influences in my sort of drift into politics was what he was doing. I thought what he was doing was important and exciting,
Yes.
and it could do something. And here was a guy, and then all of a sudden he's dead and he's gone, and everybody's saying that he had work to do, and that's the end of it. And that whole thing really affected me deeply.
Yes.
And I still read a lot of what he's written.
Did you admire Bobby Kennedy?
Yes, I admired the Kennedys greatly, particularly Jack Kennedy, who I thought he had a vision of what the world should be like, and he said it, and he went out and he did it.
There was a great air of optimism.
And he got killed for
wasn't
it. There was, and just if I should just tell you also about the 60s, I remember when we got our Leaving Cert examination results, 5 or 6 of us, and unlike today, I think we were very lucky. Unlike today, I remember 4 or 5 of us sitting on the wall in Salthill looking out to Galway Bay and saying, right, we got these Leaving Cert results and we all passed, now what do we do? And one guy I remember saying, well, I think I might do medicine. And I said, well, the college opens on Thursday, that's only 3 days away. I said, well, he says, yeah, maybe that's 7 years, I wouldn't like to spend that long at it. So after about a half an hour's discussion, we had considered not going to college at all. We might get jobs and we might interview employers who might like to take us.
Yes.
And there's no pressure. And finally we decided, because it was late and it was time to go and play football or something, we decided, right, we'll go and do commerce. We'll be entrepreneurs.
Yes.
And after all, it was the '60s. It was exciting. You could be richer. You could.
The world was there for the
Absolutely.
popular.
But the point I'm making is that the ease with which the educational system flowed at that time. I mean, here was four geniuses sitting on a wall in Salt Hill deciding that in 3 days' time they were going to go up to the university and sign on, and become commerce students. And it was as simple as that.
Yes.
There was no pressure. It was a wonderful time. And I really regret that students today haven't got that facility. It's a pity, because the pressure of employment and delivering and so on has caught up on them.
Of course, it's nearly 20 years ago now, Seamus. I mean,
I'm afraid it is, Mike.
It is, you see, when you think about the 60s. And Kennedy,
That's
21 years ago
That's
when
right.
John Kennedy died.
That's
It's
right,
just
but
a frightening thought, isn't it?
It is.
21 years
It is.
ago.
But I remember the Kennedy thing vividly,
Mm.
and I really feel that was what turned me on, as it were, to an
Yes.
extent. He came to Galway. We saw him,
Yeah.
and he was dead.
So the Beatles are an association.
Part of
are
that, part of the 67, 68 time, yes.
they? All right. Any particular reason why you have When I'm 64? Is that a statement for the future?
I think it's a request to my wife.
Oh, is it? All right. So this is for Anne.
This is for Anne, yes.
All right. That was When I'm 64, of course, from the Beatles, from the Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band album. My guest is Seamus Brennan, Fianna Fáil TD for Dublin South. Seamus, your family, you're very close to your family. I mean,
Yes.
I don't mean just your children, but your parents as well.
Yes.
And I know, is your mother, I'm sure she's listening to you on the radio
She
this
is.
morning.
I should tell you what my mother does every so often. She telephones me when I've been on a programme or in the papers, and she always finishes off with roughly the same sentence, and says, "By the way, my father and I want to know, when are you going to get a real job?"
She doesn't.
I said, "Well, I have a real job. I'm a TD." She said, "I need a real job."
Real work.
Real work. Yeah.
Yes, indeed.
So I suppose that's how she feels about the
Very
insecurity
correct.
of politics.
Mm.
Yeah, but my parents are great. I'm very proud of them.
Yes. You mentioned Jack Lynch earlier on. Would Jack Lynch have been, and Kennedy as being great influences? Jack Lynch obviously was too.
Yeah, well, he took a great risk as a 24-year-old to hand them the Fianna Fáil party and say, "Look, put this together." I'm not sure I'd have the courage to give it to a 24-year-old now, but he handed it to me, and I worked at it for 7 years, and I'd like to think it worked out. I'd like to think it was good, and that I was able to contribute. I got very close to Jack Lynch in that time.
What about the photograph, the famous photograph that you had taken of the children?
The birthday
party. Yes.
I'll tell you how that happened. Jack is one of the, he's a godfather to one of my kids.
Yes.
And this was during an election campaign. And my child's birthday actually fell, despite what the paper said, it actually fell in the middle of the election campaign. And Jack Lynch came to the house.
But on the date, though, was it on the same date that it was purported?
No, we held the party the morning before.
Yeah.
Because Jack Lynch offered to come. I had invited him, and I wasn't going to miss a chance of having him in my house. So we were glad he could come. And but let's be straight about it. I was facing a very difficult election battle in 1981.
Yes.
There wasn't a Dáil seat. There was no vacancy. I was going for a vacancy, and he offered to help. So I said, "Okay, you're on."
Very good. All right, Seamus Brennan, thank you very much indeed for coming in this morning.
Okay, Mike, thank you very much indeed.
And that was the late Seamus Brennan, who died, of course, at 60. And it was with the approval of his family that we included that recording and that song in this week's programme.